Welcome to another episode of the First Gen 101 podcast. Today we have Jacquie Carroll. Jacquie, welcome.
Thank you, Miguel. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited about this episode, and we were just talking about this moments ago before we started the recording, about how we met and how this podcast came to be. And I'm going to give our listeners some context about how we met, because I think it's going to really help us in our conversation. So we actually met during or at a financial aid conference in Chicago about 3 years ago. And at the time, I was planning on becoming an AFC, an accredited financial counselor. And we can talk about that in this episode, what that means and how it's helpful. And at the time, I shared with you this goal and you provided helpful tips. Then about a year later, you spent some time with me at the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education Symposium in New Orleans. And at the time, you were helping me understand how to navigate the certification process. And with your guidance, I was able to meet the requirements to become an AFC. So first, I want to express gratitude for your guidance in helping me secure the AFC.
You're very welcome, Miguel.
That's how you became part of my first generation story. So with that note, Jacquie, share with me your first generation story.
Absolutely. So, Miguel, one of the things is sometimes, I have my doctorate, I have an AFC, and sometimes people look at me and they don't see me as a first-gen student. And I was totally first-gen, non-traditional, all the way, muddling my way through the system. And I started out, actually, the daughter of immigrants. So I did some of the same things that probably all immigrants can relate to, which is we were in the family business, which was a restaurant business, because that's one of the things. If you're a great cook, you can start a business anywhere. And English was actually my second language. Later on, I learned Spanish, which is my third language in a way, but really English was my second language. And so, again, that's probably something that was very important because I realized you can learn English, language acquisition skills rather quickly as far as the basic interactions like, hey, how are you? I like your shirt, I like your dress and all that stuff. But once you move into academics, that's entirely different and really having to learn how to navigate the written system that you may have not been practicing all along. So that was one of the things. And then it was really I followed in my parents' footsteps for a while. I had my own restaurant. I thought, hey, my parents were ducks. I'm a duck. So quack, quack, here I go. And then it turned out I got married and had children. And I thought, you know what? I want something different, right? And I remember that I always loved learning. I enjoyed school. The bummer was when I went to high school, I was like, I was thinking, I was a student who loved learning, and to go through an educational process that takes the love of learning out of you, that says a lot. So when I started back at college, I realized, I now have some control over the things that I will learn and that. So, that's kind of how I started. And again, my parents were not able to navigate the system with me because, first of all, they're from another country. They got the education in another country. Totally different here. And so I didn't have anybody to sit down with, maybe like you and I did, to say, hey, Jacquie, here's how you do it. Here's some tweaks. Here's some things you can use. It was really, I had to find it all out the hard way. And that's why I want to share it all the time, because it takes an effort. If it was easy, everybody would have a degree.
No, I agree. And one thing that I just want to highlight, it's we now have another thing in common, and you had some experience in the restaurant business, and I worked in the restaurant business for 10 years. And we can talk about some of those experiences at another time. But one thing that you mentioned is your parents' involvement. And related to that, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced as a first-generation college student? Was it that your parents were not able to help you in ways that you needed, or maybe was it more things that you faced during college?
Well, my parents weren't able to help me at all, basically. That was not on their radar. They didn't think about it. They didn't experience in their life how that was a valuable tool for people that are living here, that's an entryway. We had a successful restaurant. They're like, hey, what's wrong with this? And so they just didn't didn't see the importance of it because what they were doing worked well, and it worked well within their parameters, right? So for me to start something new was then kind of, well, that sounds great, and good luck to you, and let us know if you need anything. But really, most of the time, it was just me. I started out, which is kind of funny. My very first education was a paralegal certificate, and I thought, oh my God, I love the law. And so I ended up trying to go into a bachelor's degree because I wanted that as the foundation for going to law school. And it turns out in that process of getting my undergraduate, I really realized what I truly love is learning and teaching and helping people learn. I still love the law. I love to argue and debate, but really it's about helping people to understand that we all can learn and we can all be successful.
What can you tell us about how do you learn to learn? In other words, how do you think students today, whether they're in high school and college, how they should be thinking about learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll tell you how I figured out, like I said, I loved to learn. So I enjoyed learning. And so I was able to bring with that my own energy and things like that, even if I had instructors and teachers that were less than motivational, let's just say that kindly, right? But when I went to college with a full-time job, 2 young children, toddlers, a husband, and trying to start changing my life through education, I was very, 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 very busy. One day, I remember coming out of the school library, and it was a beautiful day. I mean, I remember it so vividly. And I was looking around, and the sun was coming through the trees, and it was shimmering. And I was like, wow, it's spectacular. And I had no idea what I needed to do next. I was like total overload. I was like, okay, I know I'm here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, where to go next. And I realized at that point, I'm working too hard. Too hard. I needed to learn to be smarter about my time and my efforts. And so when I had a chance, I did talk to somebody at the library, and they said, hey, you know what? Have you ever thought about just checking into study skills? And I'm like, study skills? I don't have no idea what that is, right? And so study skills is a multitude of things that include things such as recognizing how we as individuals learn, because we all learn a little bit differently. We all have the capability of learning, and we all like to learn, because think of us as little babies. We were always like touching things and doing things and asking, you know what I mean? And that doesn't have to stop ever. And, but we do it a certain way. And then the other thing is also behavioral, right? So what I learned that there are cognitive functions that I needed to understand about myself, whether that was circadian rhythms, when are you highly active, aware, how does your body function, those type of things. And then also behavioral, such as discipline, getting myself disciplined. The hardest thing for me ever is I had to find time. Trying to find the time for me to do things, right? With toddler, husband, work. And so the time I found was from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning, because everybody was still sleeping. And then at night from 8 to 10, because they were little, so I could say, hey, look, the clock says 8 o'clock, it's bedtime, there's nothing, I can't help you. You know what I mean? It's just how it is. And so it would go to bed. And so then I'd have time to study. I was never a morning person. And so part of the things I learned from the study skills is to reprogram my body and to teach it to prepare to be ready, right? So it did even things I didn't think about is when you start studying, make sure your tools are already there so that you don't have to waste time to get up and refill your coffee, get a pen, find some paper, look at you know what I mean? And that's kind of almost like how athletes prepare. So really looking at study skills, both from a cognitive behavioral and a physical aspect to maximize so that you can study efficiently, effectively, and time sensitive, right? Because we all don't have any time.
I'm taking some notes, and there's a couple of things you said about study skills. And even for me, when I think of study skills, I usually think about, am I reading this properly? Am I understanding? I wasn't really thinking about just little examples such as, are you a morning person? Are you a night person? Preparing your environment, right? Having the things you need readily available so that you don't interrupt yourself with social media and cell phones being so readily available, there's a lot of distractions.
Yes.
So on the topic of distractions, how do you think people should be managing that?
That is a commitment to yourself, right? And I started that because when I was working, I realized that, I don't know, last 10 years, it really was that employers were encroaching always on your time. You would get emails all time, day, night, all that stuff. And there was an expectation almost for you to instantly respond and stuff like that.
Mm.
And I started thinking about that. And so what I did is I really, for example, just a simple thing is I took my phone, put it in my office, and at nighttime, didn't answer it. I just left it in the office, closed the door. If people call, it was just doing that. And that was very, very, really a relief to me, right? Giving myself the permission to not having to be available all the time. And so I think that's one of the things, even for first gen students, is you have to be greedy. And we're not used to being greedy. We're all very helpful. You have to learn to be greedy about your time. You have to be greedy about the things that are important to you. And so even when I was talking with my kids or my husband, it was like, look, this is important to me and I need this time. And so my kids knew when mom was studying, but then I also spent the time with them and gave them their time. But they knew it was important and I was greedy about it. And I always say, if you're going to be greedy about knowledge, because I truly believe knowledge is power.
One thing that I highlight when I talk to first generation law students, especially ones who have families, is just this. A big part of your education is going to be having these frank conversations with your family about the time management, especially nowadays where, again, there's distractions, but you also have to be really focused on what you're studying. Would you say that distractions and lack of commitment is the biggest challenge right now for students? Or what would you say it's the biggest challenge right now that first generation students should be confronting or overcoming?
Yeah. I think it's time, because we are all, there's a lot of demands on our time. We are just getting it from all ends, especially when you are trying to make it still. It's different when you already have a job and you have financial security. But when you're trying to make it, you're trying to hustle a side job. You're trying to, take care of your kids. You're trying to find daycare. You're trying to do all those different things. So time, really that time is one of the things. Finding the time, figuring out how am I going to find the time to dedicate to myself. The other thing, though, I think is cost, right? Because there's a lot of costs involved. Whether those are financial, those costs, and I want to talk a little bit more about financial hacks because I have some suggestions for that. But there's also cost to our social fabrics and our social networks, especially for first gen students. So one of the things I've recognized and I've seen with other first gen students that I've kind of mentored or talked with and things like that is that when you try to change your life and others aren't, sometimes you get some pushback. Sometimes you get some pushback from your own network where you think, my God, these people should be just like overjoyed and rooting for me and going for it. And sometimes not so much, because then sometimes, it feels like maybe those individuals look at themselves and go, well, gosh, if Jacquie can do it or if Miguel can do it, how come I'm not doing it? Well, it's just, there's even that cost in there. So sometimes you have to be prepared that there are some social costs that I think people don't even recognize, And then overall, the return on investment. The return on investment, I still believe education changed my life because it gave me the trajectory that I wanted. But the return on the investment that was true during my time is not necessarily the same now. And so really figuring out, what's important in your life? What do you want to get out of your education? How is your education going to help you achieve the things in your life that are meaningful, whether that is personal self-satisfaction, or supporting your family and providing a better future for them? And, whatever it may be, most people go to school to do something, right? To make it better for their family or even themselves. So I think those three things coupled together are some of the biggest challenges because there's a lot of noise right now. and it gets drowned out. It's hard to focus. And that's one of the things I learned with study skills is you have to focus. If you focus and block things out, that stuff, then you are getting that information. If you're constantly interrupted, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And then you think, oh, this is not for me. And it's not that. It's not, you're just not carving that time out for you so that you can get it.
I went to college. I went to a community college. And at first, I was really, for many reasons, as a young person, I wanted to go to any of the big state schools or any of the big names that were and are still popular to this day. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the time, we were just not in a financial position where we could do that. So instead, I enrolled at community college. I completed the 2 years. Then I went to a 4-year state university and then on. And now I really appreciate that because I was paying for college as I was going. I was working, paying the tuition at the community college, then working, paying the tuition at the state school. You mentioned financial hacks. What are some things that first-generation students should be thinking in terms of costs, return of investment?
Yeah. I actually had much the same journey. I started at the community college because it was easy access. It was easy access. And when I realized, oh, you can get financial aid, I'm like, oh, somebody's paying me to go to school. So I love that, right? I mean, I still had to work and all that, but taking advantage of work study. What I like about that is people at the college get to know you. And once people get to know you, when opportunities arise, they will say, hey, Miguel, hey, Jacquie, there's that scholarship you might be well suited for. Why don't you apply for it? Why don't you check it out, right? So networking early on. I like the fact that what I would say now is even people who are, which they didn't have this when you and I were going probably, but now a lot of students are able to complete a co-curricular opportunity during high school. So they're able to attend already. When I was teaching at the community college, I used to teach English, and I had a lot of students who were enrolled who were high school students who were doing dual credit. So leveraging that dual credit if you can. The other thing is for non-traditional students, one of the hacks that I found is that you don't have to necessarily take the class. You just have to demonstrate mastery. So for example, I was fluent in German and you had to have foreign language. So I clept that. So that clepping saved me a lot of time, right? So some people might be able to take Spanish as a second language or French or whatever it is. Or if you can demonstrate any other skill that you could learn in a class where you're really providing that demonstration that you have that skill. So for me as a person that was already married, I had run my own business and all those type of things, I was also using a portfolio development. So you could put together a portfolio that showcased skills that you already had that were transferable into education, and then you would just pay a fee. And so that, it just made things a little bit faster. And then when I went to my transfer to the state school, again, at the time, I think it was still doable. I was working. Again, I was working work study. I did some fun stuff with work study. I mean, I learned how to become research art and things like that. And I'm kind of doing that right now. You can see I still got some art pieces in the back where I'm doing some fun stuff like that. But those create really opportunities as far with connections within the school. And so again, leveraging the scholarships and those type of things that come your way and really focusing on that is one. But I also did the same as you, which is pay as you go and take your time because there's no rush. There's no rush. You're actually tortoise and the hare. If you're taking that that step, moving towards the future, that's the right direction. And so then I finished my bachelor's degree. I had an emergency. We had an emergency as a family, and I took out a $2,500 loan at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, $2,500. That's just, no. And then I paid that back it was $50 because it was under a certain amount. Then you only pay $50. I think it took like 4 years to pay it back, which is still a long time. Think about that, 50, you know what I mean? And then I had an opportunity. I was in the educational setting, and I was able to get a scholarship full ride for a master's degree. And there I did my multicultural teaching English as a second language degree. And so that was free. So that was awesome. And then as I continued on in education, I was at another university, and they had a program that was called tuition assistance. And so that tuition assistance program is available to a wide variety of people. It's not just for higher education. Even when I was working with law school students, I had a student who was working like in New York for the sheriff's department, and they wanted to go to law school. And so they were going to go part-time, and then they were leveraging that tuition assistance and getting that reimbursed, any courses that they took. So, Starbucks, Costco, I mean, there's a whole bunch of companies, if you wanted to work and go part-time, that will pay for you to complete your educational program. This school paid for that. I think at the time it was like $5,250 of credits you could do. And so I think I benefited for that for like maybe 4 years. And then I took out some student loans, which I wish I wouldn't have done. Like now, in retrospect, I think I would have just said, no, you know what? I'm just going to wait a little bit. But then later on, I was at some other organizations where I was able to do, certificate program at Harvard. They paid for that. I didn't pay for that. Leverage those type of things. So my advice would be is, if you can, pay and learn as you go. That would be probably ideal, because nowadays, it's the return on your investment is really good for probably still your bachelor's degree. But once you move up a little bit higher, I think you really need to crunch the numbers.
It wasn't until I worked in admissions that I realized, you know what, an MBA will actually be very helpful in helping me with the work that I do. And so I completed my MBA, and very similar to your experience, I also used tuition. In our case, it's called tuition remission. But it wasn't until I started working that I realized that I needed this. It seems to me that there are a lot of students who just want to do all these things without even thinking about how they benefit. And so I think it's really important for students to, go to school, but also maybe get some work experience especially after their bachelor's degree, so they can get a sense of what's best for them in terms of learning. Going back to this idea of learning how to learn, it's knowing about knowing yourself and knowing what's going to help you in the long term or in the medium term. That said, I want to talk about mentorship, because I think one of the ways that first generation graduates and students can empower themselves is building a network. We talk about mentorship, but how do you find a mentor? Do you go to someone and say, hey, do you want to be my mentor? Do you go to someone and say, hey, do you want to be my mentee? Like, how does that relationship start?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I went to a conference once, and I want to tell you something. And this is something I learned so late in life. I wish I would have learned it a lot sooner, because it's so powerful. And it was a woman, and she did the presentation, and there's something about pearls of wisdom or something. And I just don't remember the name. But her advice was this: get yourself a peer that you can talk to. And the peer is somebody that you can talk to and really say, hey, you know what? Today I'm having a bad day. Or, oh my God, this is great. Whatever it is. Get somebody that really you can connect to on that personal level, where you can share whatever happens without any feeling of repercussion or anything like that. Then get yourself a mentor, somebody that will take you under your wings. And I personally believe that, yes, ask for it. Figure out, sometimes you'll find people who they mentor you, but I think it's okay to ask for it. Help me get to the next level, because people actually want it. I hardly find anybody that says, nope, not going to help you. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. Nope, not at all. Right? People want to help. We all want your success is my success. I'm overjoyed you got your AFC, right? And but help asking for mentors. So I think sometimes that's kind of unusual, because we're also in a culture where we're not encouraged to ask for help. It's like, hey, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yes.
Work a little harder. You're not doing it right. No. All the best people that are successful have a mentor. So get a mentor. Here's the one that was often overlooked for me. I didn't know until the very end. When you are at your job and at your career, Get somebody that is an advocate for you at the decision-making table, because that's going to be instrumental for navigating your career, right? It's great to have somebody to bounce ideas off on a peer. It's somebody great to have a mentor that's going to say, hey, blah, 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 here's what you should do to get to the next level. But unless there's somebody at the decision-making table saying, is that person that we're going to float up the chain and he's going to be the next so-and-so, it's not going to happen, right? And so having all three is very important, and they all have distinctively different functions. And I think I wanted to share that because I learned that so late. I'm just like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Because if you have nobody at the table, like they say, if you are not representative at the table, you're usually on the menu.
How was it for you? How did you find a mentor like for your first job? The reason why I'm highlighting this point is because it seems to me like there's a gap. Students finish the degree and then they need to get this first job. But a lot of people, or a lot of students are under this belief that just by sending out applications is enough, and it's not. You really have to build that social capital. How was it like for you? Did you have anyone helping you get your first job? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So, you know what the thing is? I worked at the Study Skills Center at the university, right? So I actually became a peer mentor for study skills, helping students learn how to learn. Because when I learned that, I was like, I got to share this with everybody. This is so important, And so I became a mentor, and I love that. My first job was kind of a job at the university. It was, and I had a mentor there who was my supervisor. And the greatest thing she ever did for me is, hey, you know what? I'm a great public speaker and I can talk to anybody. I used to do presentations and things like that, but I could not write worth nothing. I never learned how to type or anything like that. And she held me accountable on that and said, look, this is one of the things you need to learn. And I'm like, okay. And so my mentor in that job was great because she said, yeah, you do a lot of things good, but that's not good enough. You're going to need to help and do this. And so I learned a lot of things under her tutelage. And then I was going to apply at the college for a job. And she said, you know what? You don't need to work here. You're good now. You can go out now and get a job out in the real world. And so having that, so that was kind of almost like a transitional job for me, right? From being in academia to doing something, a job at the college that wasn't necessarily a work study job, and then going into really the career. So that's kind of how it happened with me. It was really because I didn't know I needed a mentor, and I didn't really see what my shortcomings were.
I'm glad you shared that. One of the things that we often overlook is, as we're searching for mentors, we want people to support us, to be sort of our cheerleaders. But I think we also need to find mentors who are going to be frank and going to be a guide in telling us, okay, you need to work on this, you need to work on that. If you don't know your shortcomings or your weaknesses, it's going to be very hard to improve. Jacquie, what has been your biggest achievement as a first-generation graduate?
I think my biggest achievement has been that I'm able to pass on to as many people as possible that everybody can learn. No matter what you want to learn, you can learn. And it's because, I helped my sisters get a bachelor's degree, helped them navigate the system, my children did and things like that. But it was really that whole thing about learning how to learn and making that so that we can do the things in our life that we want to. And so because those are all transferable skills, it doesn't matter what you do, that learning how to learn is so important because younger people nowadays are going to change jobs. My God, in our time, they said 10 to 15 different jobs, maybe no career changes, right? But the younger generation now, they're saying you might change complete careers. So doing something entirely different. And learning those skills are transferable skills. And recognizing that, I think, is power. Like even for me, I actually now full circle, I'm leaving education. I started a new business, creating games that have an educational component, that are highly motivational. I've always used to hear, for example, people say, oh my God, I can't do math as a study skills tutor. I just can't do it. I heard it from law school students. I'm like, no, that's actually not true. People can. And so I started to think about, creating games that help promote learning in authentic ways, that make it fun, that make it engaged. And so that to bring that love of learning back to people that we had when we were little kids, because that's what life is. It's just full of discovery, of learning, and things that the future holds we don't even know.
And so how can people learn more about these games to help promote learning?
So my first game that is Get 9, which is, again, it's fun, motivational, but it's also to help you overcome that math anxiety. Go to GameKraft.us, and craft is spelled with a K, which means strength and power in German. So it's, powered through games, and just email me. And I'd be happy to share anything I know with anybody. You can check out the game. My next game that I'm trying to develop right now is Going to College. Because, again, having been in financial aid for such a long time, the one thing that financial aid I always heard is saying, we tell students, but they just don't get it. And they're like, it would be great if there was a game. So I'm like, well, let me think about it. And so that's going to be my next one. So if you want to check that out, if you want to give me some feedback, insights, participate, and, I just reach out and I'll tell you anything I know. I really will, because I love sharing the knowledge. That's what it's about for me.
Thank you, Jacquie. And I'll be sure to include the information on the show notes and on our links so people can find it and share their thoughts with you. Jacquie, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences.
Thank you.